Good afternoon. This is Old Gravy. Welcome back. I'm actually producing this show down in Jupiter, Florida, so the studio is going to look a little different. I'm not up in New Jersey where you regularly hear me and listen to me out of my South Jersey location, but we're down here in Jupiter. I'll be down here for the next few months, and if you're listening and watching the show on YouTube, you're going to follow me down here. So anyway, let's get to business. Today's podcast sponsor is inspectmysmarthome.com. Do not buy a smart home without a technical inspection. So go to inspectmysmarthome.com. That's inspectmysmarthome.com. And once again, don't ever buy a smart home, technical home without getting inspection. I'll tell you about that later if we do my commercial at the wrap up later on the show. But once again, that's inspectmysmarthome.com. So everyone, I'll give you a time frame here. I'm in the studio today, and I'm going to have a guest, who I'm going to tell you about in a couple of minutes. But just to give you a time frame here, this is we just got through the inauguration. And what I've said on the podcast before, if Trump did win the election, when Trump did take office, he would be wrecking the place. And literally, he is wrecking the place in a good way. And I'll be honest, it's only, 48, 72 hours. And I can't believe how much wrecking he is actually doing. But, you're getting a lot of coverage of that over the next weeks with all the different media. But in today's show, we're going to cover a lot of different subjects, but we're going to go back in time about Trump. And we're going to talk about the cultural change in the Republican Party that he brought. And we're going to talk about this transformation of the Republican Party, and it's going to come from the Bush Dynasty to the Trump Dynasty. And we're going to dig in on that. And I'm actually going to bring you back down memory lane on some things that you probably won't want to hear with Trump, but it's going to be very interesting and very revealing. We're also going to get into the LA fires. And I'm not going to be talking specifically. You're getting that all on the news, but I am going to, with my guest, analyze some of the comments from the celebrity Hollywood sect out there about what was going on, what is still going on, and hopefully it gets resolved quickly. And we're also, if we get a chance, we're going to talk about Greenland. And I'm always surprised at the elite's reaction when people try to step out of the box and do things. But acquiring Greenland is not new, and we're going to get into that. This is a strategy that American politicians, leadership have looked at over our history. So we're going to dig into that. But what I want to do is I want you to welcome my guest. Today's guest is Lou Manzi. He's the president of Arrow Consulting. Lou is a Burlington City. That's Burlington City, New Jersey. And what me and Lou have in common, I started my business in Burlington City, which I have for 20 years. Lou, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
I'd like to say, if I think, well, Lou's from Burlington City, but he's an LBI guy. That's Long Beach Island in New Jersey. He's a Jupiter, Florida guy. He lives in Italy at times and celebrates Christmas in London. Is that true?
Yeah, that's sort of just schizophrenia at its best, but absolutely.
Yes,
good to be here.
I love having you, Lou. You're a human resource executive. And what I love about Lou is he's not your typical HR guy. And I've known a lot of HR guys. Usually they don't have your type of sense of humor, your type of personality. And you've worked at some of the highest levels of HR for some of the biggest companies in the world. And you just have, I guess, there's always an outlier in an industry, in a specific industry or career. So comment on your HR background a little bit.
Well, growing up in Burlington, my parents are immigrants, legal immigrants, I might add, and grew up in Burlington, Catholic school, and probably the shortest guy in all my classes in Catholic school, and somehow maybe that had an impact on me, right? Being the shortest, I had to do things a little differently.
Yeah, you probably had a different strategy
I
to
did.
engage with people.
Absolutely. And, growing growing up in an Italian family, we were not kept under the bushel basket. I mean, when
Yeah.
people felt something, they said it. People never held grudges, of course.
Right.
And that was maybe the beginning of, working for a utility company. And in my late teens, right after college, an opportunity to move into HR. And it was more about not a people business, but sort of representing sometimes maybe people who aren't heard,
Right.
or representing what I think is right, or being able to say something that people don't have the courage to say.
Right.
And I think that was sort of the beginnings of it. And, went off to college, and then decided, did some nonprofit work, volunteer and then paid. And then had the opportunity to work for a major pharmaceutical company where I was really, it played to my strength. It was
Right.
really managing a management training program and making people selection. And my selection is not just on the skill set, right?
Right.
It's really about behavior. It's about emotional
Well,
intelligence.
business is sociology.
It is, isn't it?
It's no doubt about it. It's about
And
people.
It is. And it's not, listen, one of my favorite sayings is, you hire on skill set, you fire on behavior.
Yeah.
So part of my strategy is go back into the behavior, pick people on, make the selection, not just on the skill set, right?
Right.
It's, when a guy flies an airplane, or he's a pilot and he works for an airline, he's been certified by the FAA. He's capable. He knows all the right stuff. How does he interact in the cockpit? How does he handle issues? How does he And that, for me, became a guiding principle.
You just led me into something which I think my listeners are going to find really interesting. And I always tell my guests, they don't know what I say. Get on the bus. I'm going to take you down the road. And we're just going to drive.
I don't know
down
where
there.
we're going.
You don't know where you're going, but you brought up something which I actually have in my notes that I wanted to talk to you about. So GlaxoSmithKline. GlaxoSmithKline, right? It was
the mergers
and everything. They have their own private jets, obviously, like a lot of big companies. Yep. What I found interesting is in the HR, doing everything that you did, across the board in HR, but you oversaw the flight team.
Correct.
I found and you are a pilot too.
I am, and my boss was, is still around, and he's a great guy. And one day he said to me, in companies about development, he said, how would you like to manage the flight department? And it was like, this is manna from heaven.
Did he know you were a pilot?
Oh, he did. Yeah. He
Okay.
knew that. And being able to, there is a different type of mentality in pilots, right? I mean,
Right.
It's you get on the plane, you do your job, and then you go home. But in a corporate flight department, it's more than that, right? You're working with people. You might be on a 12-day trip from Philadelphia to Singapore. So the capability factor is not just the skill set. It's how do you get along with people while you are away.
I want to explain something which that I found interesting. So Lou has a lot of events with a lot of different people at his events, and a lot of stuff is built around a lot of the charity work you do, and there's a ton of it. But I will say this is a guy that he walks the talk as far as charitable things. And if you're privileged to get invited to one of Lou's events, they're great. And I won't go into the details of the event, but I'm talking to your head pilot at Glaxo. And what he explained to me that you oversaw everyone thinks that they got private jets and they hire different contract pilots, mechanics, and whatever. What your head pilot told me is that everything is only touched by a Glaxo employee. So that even the flight attendants, mechanics, they were all under your supervision,
right.
under your silo,
right.
or whatever.
We had an office that handled, executive travel, and typically it was reserved for the executive management team. But just think about corporate flying, or people who go out and get, jet services today, it's the only real time machine around.
Yeah.
You've got an executive whose time is worth X dollars, and he needs to fly from Philadelphia to do a launch in Chicago and then in Denver and then fly to London or vice versa. It is a time saving. So yes, there is a cost factor,
Right.
but again, the security factor is another thing.
Oh, he actually said we don't want some hired hand mechanic touching
Correct.
our plane.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it can be controversial in companies, but I think it is a time machine. It is a safety factor. I don't have to tell you that, the capability of a senior executive is paramount in a
Yeah.
company. So, we didn't have a flight attendant, to be honest with you, but, we had 2 or 3 pilots on each flight, and, being able to finish a board meeting or the board. I remember years ago, we had a Falcon, and many of the board members were from the West Coast. We'd fly out, or the pilots would fly out, pick them up, fly back. They'd have the board meeting, and 3 days later. I mean, that time savings it's
Is
a
big.
time machine.
I love that you got to. I mean, listen, you were overseeing a lot of different
Yeah.
things, but that must have been a nice little. When you're doing your work, you have a nice little niche thing to
Yes.
oversee. That's really
Well,
cool.
and Tom, look, the reality here is we had very capable people. As a leader of the flight department, I was not involved in
Right.
the little stuff. You had guys like AJ and Tommy and somebody else who managed. These guys were so capable
Yeah.
that as a leader, you create the environment where people do their best work.
That's good stuff. So that gives you a little bit of background on Lou. There's a lot more there, but I know my listeners, they're going to want to hear my opinion and your opinion on where we're going, and that is the demographic shift in the Republican Party. And the Bush family, I believe, unintentionally created the anti-elite movement in this country. And listen, this is the caveat. George Bush is a good guy and all that.
Right.
I get that, and the family's a nice family or whatever. But the anti-corporate country club kind of revolution of the Republican Party, I think that was started
The beginning.
That was the beginning
Yep.
of the Bush Dynasty. That they actually created the Trump movement. What happened, I think, and I'm going to play you an audio in a minute. The Bushes overstayed their welcome, and the George W. Bush's administration, if we go through the history, it was pretty much a disaster. And then all of a sudden now Jeb Bush. So 3 people in the same family are going to run the country. That is hubris. Now, if this family had been all stars and everything went well, maybe someone would say, let's give this Jeb Bush another shot. He comes from a really well-known family. They're really good. That was not the conditions when Jeb.
He was a Bush.
Yeah, he was a Bush.
He was a
And
Bush.
when he came in to run, and the establishment of the Republican Party was like, yeah, he's the guy. But we all know another dog showed up in the pound, and his name was Donald Trump. And I think this clip I'm going to play you is the beginning of that transformation of this kind of anti-corporate elite country club. And I don't say, listen, I belong to country clubs. This has nothing to do with, and I always say, elitism has nothing to do with your finances.
Correct.
Okay? It's the way you think. It's the way you think about other Americans. It's more of a class system in America, which we never had. But there needed to be a shift because people got away from God, they got away from patriotism, and everything became about money. But Trump's timing coming up again, the Bushes helped Trump. That's my point. But let's take a listen here, Lou.
Okay.
Here we go.
A lot of times, that's all of his donors and special interests out there. So, that's what it is. That's what, and by the way,
I should have set it up better, and I'm going to go right back
Okay.
to it. So basically, this is the first debate back in 2015, for the 2016 run.
16.
This is the first debate The booing you're hearing is the audience because Trump is going after Jeb Bush, and the whole place is booing him. And he'll tell you why.
We needed tickets. You can't get them. You know who has the tickets for the? I'm talking about to the television audience. Donors, special interests, the people that are putting up the money. So it is. The RNC told us we have all donors in the audience, and the reason they're not loving me, the reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money. I don't need their money. And I'm the only one up here that can say that. Eminent domain.
Okay. So
he's certainly pushing them out of their comfort zone.
Oh, my God. Believe me, when that came out, that was a punch in the face. That was the beginning of the revolution where those traditional donors. So Trump goes on the attack. So now where I'm going to bring you is it is amazing when you go back, you think like in recent years what he's been through, but even what happened to him in 2016. And we're going to talk about Billy Bush. Are you familiar with Billy Bush?
Vaguely.
Okay, so he was a host of Access Hollywood.
Correct.
The host
Correct.
of
Yep.
Now, so everyone knows who Billy Bush is. His uncle is George H. Bush, the first president.
Correct.
So his two first cousins are George W.
and Billy, right?
Billy's first cousins are George and Jeb.
And George Jeb.
Yeah, so
Got it.
they're first cousins. So what happens is there's the tape that gets out, and it's a month before the election. So this is 2016. It's Trump versus Hillary, and a tape is released. Now, the tape that is released in 2016 is 11 years old. That tape is from 2005.
Nobody knows that.
No,
right?
Right.
I mean, nobody realizes the age of the tape.
The tape is very old.
Yes.
And so what happens on this tape, and I'm going to use this is a podcast. We're just going to say where Trump says, "Grab the P."
Yep.
Okay. And for anyone else, this would literally end any Republican's chance. Would it have ended a Democrat's chance? Probably not. We had the whole Monica Lewinsky, the cigar, or whatever.
Correct.
Republicans had to play a different rule.
Right.
But Donald Trump will even break that barrier, that whole sexual, what would you say, piousness or,
holier than
thou.
Yep.
So this tape, no matter how brutal it was for Trump, this tape in the long run would be a benefit to break down that barrier for a guy like him, to become the president. But I want to talk about Billy Bush a little bit. Billy Bush, when he did that tape, Donald Trump, when he did the tape, Donald Trump was the king of NBC. That Apprentice show was so big that Billy Bush would do, and this is something interesting. This Access Hollywood on NBC, it wasn't really it was there to promote all the lineups. Like if you watch that show for a half an hour, whatever it is, the whole show was just to promote the other shows on NBC.
The network.
On the network.
Right.
So Billy Bush knows Trump better than anyone. You know why? The show was doing so well, they would have to go out and do stuff together 3 days a week. Billy Bush does a podcast with Tucker Carlson. This is where I picked up this information, and we're going to go in a different direction with it. But the bottom line is he knows Donald Trump really well.
Very
right?
well.
And him and Tucker, as they're joking, say, this is one of the funniest guys around. And being a funny guy has some downsides. So I think in HR, I'm surprised you made it all these years.
Yeah,
You're funny.
My wife is
has warned you.
No, but see, a lot of it is what's behind it. Does the guy care? The optics sometimes say something different. But it's a different, the Bush administration, and then what Trump brought in was there's another perspective. It's not just the rich and famous. It's not the people at the country clubs. It's people who represent another perspective or a way of thinking. So again, something starts out really negative. You and I know I'm the kind of guy that I'll tell you exactly, what's worse, not knowing or finding out.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there is a part of Trump that, is he a record? But he's saying what a lot of people feel and have been prevented from saying.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, I mean, the Bush connection at the time, but you're right. Access Hollywood was a great marketing tool.
For the network.
For the network.
So he spends a lot of time with Trump. And so what happens is they have no clue they're on a hot mic.
Correct.
Right? So that's illegal. They're in the state of California.
It's wrong.
They're sitting on a bus. They're
It's
still
wrong.
mic'd. The sound guy has left the bus. These are two guys having a private conversation. Listen, people have private conversations
All the time.
all the time, and guys talk about beautiful women
All the time.
That's how we create a population.
Exactly.
Men being attracted to women. So what happens in 2015? Yeah. So, or right at the run up when they released this in October,
Right before the election.
Right before
That's
the
right.
election. So NBC doesn't love Trump. He was the guy, meaning he was making them tons of money. But between 2005 and 2016, they get into a dispute on The Apprentice. And they also fight about his world pageants or whatever, because they were all being put on NBC. So they have a legal war. And this is what someone said. This is where Trump derangement syndrome occurs in the media. They probably didn't like him anyway. Billy Bush liked him. Billy Bush definitely liked him and said he was fun to hang out with and he was a good guy.
Tom, there's a lot of times that we don't like what somebody says because we don't agree. They may be right.
Yeah.
They may add a perspective that we don't have.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what was he saying? And it was a private conversation.
Yeah. Well, it was illegal. So what do they do?
Right.
So the head of NBC, who wants to get even with Trump over all the lawsuits, probably he's a liberal and he doesn't want him to be president.
Right.
And he's probably a Hillary supporter. And they're all conniving at NBC.
And pressuring him, I might add, right?
Who, Billy?
No. I mean the head of NBC.
Yeah.
The pressure's coming on to him.
Well, they want to release it. So what does he do? The big shot at NBC, his college roommate, probably from one of the Ivy Leagues, sends it to his buddy who's a big-time writer at the Washington Post. So the Washington Post can publish it because they could say, we can't relieve our sources.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
So this is how they nail, this is how they get the tape out, which almost takes Trump down. Now, Billy Bush now the media goes after him because... And you know what? Let's play the tape.
All right.
Let me pull up this tape because it's worth everyone getting to hear it again, even though.
Yeah, that's it, with the gold. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Okay. We'll edit because I'm only using the P word. I'll edit that out.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, NBC, Billy Bush has now gone to host the Today Show. It's the biggest job he's ever gotten. Ever. And now they're hanging him 11 years later on this tape. And
a private conversation.
In a private conversation.
Illegally taped.
Sent to the Washington Post. Right. So because they can't get in trouble
You
now.
got it.
So Billy Bush is in a big jam. Now, he has just gotten the biggest contract. Now, Matt Lauer and Al Roker are over at the Today Show. Billy Bush says outright that Matt Lauer hates him because he's got better hair. Right? And what's so funny, like when you think about how this is all tied together, he's a Bush with Trump, and then there's uncles and cousins.
Right.
And now you got Matt Lauer, who a few years later had the button under the
He's an
under
outsider.
the desk.
Let's be honest. He's an outsider.
Who was
Who
had
Push
the
the button.
women issues.
You got it.
But so it's really, I like to go back in time to remind people.
But how arrogant of him,
Yeah.
right? Let's be honest, how rude and arrogant, knowing what kind of guy he was with the button, and now, he in glass houses.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Yeah,
right?
it all comes out in the end. That's why I like having a podcast, to bring you down memory lane a little bit.
Well, to present some of the facts that most of us never hear.
Yeah. So with Billy, what the media came after for him, now that he has this big job, right? They said, you should have stepped up and said something. Okay, this is the truth. When two guys are having a private conversation, if Billy Bush had said to Donald Trump, when that was one of the number one show or whatever in the country, making NBC say if you said to Donald Trump, Donald, that is very rude, and I want you to, apologize to me or never say that again. Say he wagged his finger with the guy he's hanging out with, the guy that's making NBC. Trump would have walked into NBC and said, get Billy Bush off of Extra. You're gone.
Get him
Let's get him out of here. So poor Billy Bush, another interesting thing about Billy Bush, when he does the interview with Tucker, they went to the same high school together, Tucker Carlson. And they dated sisters.
Oh, my
Now,
gosh.
Tucker would marry one of the sisters.
Right.
Billy didn't.
Yeah.
But, he had a great line when you talk about like an old girlfriend or something. Yeah. And plus, Tucker's got to go home to his wife. This is his sister. So when he mentions that, when Tucker says, full disclosure, we went to high school together, right. We dated sisters. And Billy Bush leans back and goes, oh, my first love, and hits his chest. What a nice way to, not a nice way to not get involved in another Trump incident. Right. But
at least he learned, right?
Yes, he learned. He handled that better. But I don't think there was, my point about him with Trump. He's in there as a guy. He didn't give a crap. He even admits he didn't even remember the grab. Now, this is what Old Gravy has said for years. If Trump had used the word bang or hit the P, that would have had a different, I know you got to think about this. Language is so important when it's going to be exploited by the media, because grab is an old word. It was like the guy in the 60s or 70s, the boss grabbing women in the office or at a restaurant. The word grab, Trump used an old word. He's an older guy.
Yep.
If he had used a more modern, what the contemporary guys would use or whatever, they would have had a tougher time of bringing them down. If he just said, because everyone knows it's true. He says, if you're famous, if guys are rich and famous, women even talk about this. Some women do throw themselves at rich, powerful men. That's been going on for the age of time.
Correct.
So I actually think that word kind of tripped them up a little bit. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have went after him, but that word kind of tripped them up a little bit.
And look, there is an issue. I mean, we may have conversations privately, and we may back and forth a topic, or we may get a little bit off color. However, that doesn't represent all of us, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't represent who we really are. And I defy anybody, in the listening world who has not said something.
Oh, of course.
And the illegal part that most people in the world didn't know is that conversation was a private conversation that was leaked sort of illegally. It was illegal to tape that off the record conversation. So, and that's what drove that. If you
that drove the
emotion around,
and that he was immoral.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
And it's ironic. And that's what we were talking about earlier, this change in the Republican Party of like morality to us now is not sending kids off to war, not shipping our jobs overseas. It's not.
That's a change, big change.
So, and even late term abortion, like we're with that, but like everyone's like, okay, abortion's legal, depending, what state you live in. This gender affirming care, where you have young children taking drugs to change their gender. Now that's a moral issue now that most Republicans, that's the party today. The
would have never been discussed in the Bush years.
Yeah.
Never.
The religious thing was part that, like, sexual type of conduct seemed to be so big in the Republican Party. But obviously we're over that. We have bigger moral fights to fight not that nonsense. And I always say this about Trump: doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, raised great kids. No doubt about it. He loves women and golf. And
the country.
Oh, absolutely.
And the country.
Perfect. You just said it. He is an America. He's America first. He's very American. So, but this is an HR question that I'm going to come to you.
Right.
So Billy, so what a lot of people do when their back is up against the wall, they come out with this apology to the mob. Okay. So I'll read you his apology.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm embarrassed and ashamed. Now, he's talking about this 11 years later. Obviously, I'm embarrassed and ashamed. It's no excuse, but this happened 11 years ago. I was younger, less mature, and acted foolishly in playing along. I'm very sorry. Okay, Bush was 33 years old when the tape was made, okay, in 2005. So he's not that young. So what would happen to Billy now that he issues this apology? He would then be railroaded out of Hollywood, and I don't think he would get a job for 3 years.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the apology thing, I'm a big don't apologize to a mob, ever. Matter of fact, I say go on the offense. If I had a consulting company, maybe we could start one after this
Yeah,
show.
right.
Meaning, these mob apologies have not worked out.
Ever.
They
Ever.
never work out
They
for
never
anybody.
work out.
So the poor guy, he got his career just savaged by that tape. And actually, when you listen to him with Tucker, you feel bad. And Matt Lauer had it out for him. Al Roker had it. It's such a vile place it can be. Well, it's a competitive business, and we've all been in competitive things. But by the end of, I like Billy Bush. I thought he was very honest. He actually plays. I have I took a clip from his interview with Tucker Carlson, and it's I thought it was very revealing. He even says, and let's listen to it first, and then we'll kind of analyze it.
As a man who has spent probably the most amount of time, this is a terrible idea. Now, to be clear, I'm the nephew of George H.W. Bush. This is he was a real steward and by the book sort of guy, and felt, he was a character first, all these things. Trump was something we'd never seen before.
Well, and also he was, since you brought it up, he was running against your cousin.
And he's running against Jeb, low energy Jeb.
Yeah.
Is what he called him.
So this puts you in like the weirdest position of anybody in the media.
Yeah. Yeah, when he started saying the low energy thing, I was like, oh, man, really? Donald, Jesus.
They're friends.
You're so brutal, but God, that works, doesn't it? What people misjudged was they were sick of everything, that the way things had been done, and that he knew that, and that's why Trump is smart.
So even Billy says, like what we're talking about, that change in the Republican Party. Like, here's this guy being interviewed now in 2024, but this is before Trump has just won.
Correct.
The election. Or maybe it's between. I'm not really sure. But even as he reflects back on his own family and his cousins, he kind of is saying, like, that it was time to end that. And I thought that was it was kind of revealing. Most guys wouldn't go down that road with family,
right?
And I thought it was just very honest. That's why I wanted to kind of highlight it. But I'm going to take a real quick commercial break right here. We're not going anywhere because it's a live not live, but I have to read my.
We're alive.
Yeah, I have to read. So I want to talk to you about Plaza Grande. Have you been dreaming of a maintenance-free country club lifestyle in a stunning residence? Look no further than the Plaza Grande in Cherry Hill. That's where the old racetrack was, Lou. Imagine living in a place where you can enjoy luxury community amenities and where everything is just minutes away. Restaurants, retail shops, grocery stores. It's all at your fingertips. They have pristine swimming pools. You can stroll to nearby stores. Tons of activities, pools, movies, mahjong, bingo, you name it, they have it. Right now, you can get 1 month free on an 18-month lease or 2 months free on a 24-month lease. For more information, head to PlazaGrandeCherryHill.com. That's PlazaGrandeCherryHill.com. We're going to be right back. Hey, welcome back to the Old Gravy podcast. I just finished up my Plaza Grande advertisement or promotion for Plaza Grande over there in Cherry Hill, which was the former racetrack over in South Jersey. And the reason I'm bringing it up again is because on our commercial break here, Lou told me his dad was a horse trainer there. That's very interesting. Your dad was a horse trainer at the Philly race.
Well, at
What was
Cherry
it
Hill.
called? Cherry Hill.
Cherry Hill. Garden
Cherry Hill.
State. It was Garden State Park.
That was it.
And the irony was that the last day when Cherry Hill or Garden State major fire,
Yeah.
he was there.
Was that the end of the racetrack?
That
at that
was
point?
the end of that was sort of the beginning of the end, and then they did some other
Yeah.
stuff. But as he knew it, yeah, very.
Well, it's a fascinating
Yeah,
place.
it
Like
sure
the
is.
community
It's
that
beautiful.
they're
I've been there. A
building.
buddy of mine lives there.
Oh,
and,
no way.
Yeah, he lives there, and
So the developer and the owner of it has been on the podcast.
oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well,
yeah.
listen. Congratulations, because the place is beautiful. The restaurants and it's a great area.
So we're going to jump back into we were talking about Billy Bush, but we're leading into another subject here. But he apologizes, and he's still, for that old tape, and he still gets fired. He loses his big contract from the Today Show. But in your career, the apology thing, when does it work? Does it ever work apologizing to the mob?
Well, it says you're guilty. I think,
Yeah.
if you apologize, it says you made a mistake. Okay. If somebody with whom I work does something at home and uses an off-color phrase, that's none of my business.
Right.
Right. And if somebody tapes him and brings the tape to me at work, that's unfair. He works in the company. He's judged on what he does. And I think very often people say things in the privacy, or as the Brits would say, the privacy of their own home, and then get massacred or crucified. And they put, as in the Billy Bush thing, apologized for something that basically was said in the privacy of his own location.
It's so if and if it's a social media mob, never apologize. There are people that don't apologize. So one is Donald Trump.
Right.
One is Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais never apologizes.
Love the Golden Globes.
Yeah. And he has said other things since then, and he says it's my free speech. That's all he says.
Right.
It's my free.
That's his opinion. That's his perspective.
And he's going to give it to you any way he wants. Now he is from
Britain.
Written,
Yeah.
so they might throw him in jail over
Right.
there. You can still that place is that, and that's a whole other.
But you
podcast.
can't have free speech for one group
Yeah.
and not free speech for the other.
Well, and it seems that anyone who does whatever, if their free speech is horrible or whatever, if they apologize for it, it's like blood in the water. The sharks just keep coming
they keep
at
coming
you.
after you.
Kid Rock's another guy that never apologized. I saw him hold a press conference with the media about something he said about a senator running for Michigan, and he lines up a press conference that it's supposed to be apology. He comes out and tells the media to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then leaves.
Yeah.
That was it. And then, but no, what's interesting is the people that don't apologize, things move on. Like you just seem to be, they're like, once they can't get you, it's not like they come up for another apology. Or usually, I'm looking at apologies from Bryan Adams, John Rocker of the Braves, Michael Richards. These are all celebrities. Matt Lauer did one. Gene Simmons did a funny one from Kiss. He did an apology when Prince died. He said it was his own choice because he liked to use drugs. So basically, he made a choice to use drugs, and that choice.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. So that choice ended up. But when he came out with his apology, I thought this was funny. He said, and I wrote it down here. He goes, he started taking so much flack. He goes, the only reason this is while he's apologizing. Then he says, the only reason I'm apologizing is because my family wants me to. Because they were taking too much crap.
And he was being honest.
Yeah.
Right. He
gave an apology, but not really. And a lot of the apologies kind of go that way. But I had this written earlier. HR does a lot of cleaning up, like apologies. You've worked in that area in the sense that the company does something bad happens, like at a corporate level. I guess that's a different animal.
Well, I think a lot of, in terms of my position or my perspective. As a leader of the company, what is my job? My job is, like a CEO or like a chief medical, create the environment where people do their best work. A lot of it is proactivity. I do a lot of work with some local police departments, and they are brilliant at training people on the statutes, right? But the what is not the whole piece. It's the behavior. What do cops get in trouble for? The 10 seconds that somebody tapes them totally out of context. So in companies, I think it is about creating, what the job is, what you need to do. What are the three, you take high performance teams. Anybody is part of a team. It's communication, it's role clarity, and it's trust. What is your job? What are you supposed to do? In a strategic HR role, you try, or you are proactive. You don't want to be putting fires out all the time.
You want to get ahead of it.
You want to prevent the fire from happening. And
Yeah.
maybe that's another topic that we'll get into,
Yeah.
right?
But we're going into the fires.
But the point is, if you spend your time doing the right thing, and in Trump, people are always trying to tell him what to do, right? He does what he believes is right. He doesn't have this this minuscule view. He does it, and he thinks out loud, right? We all think out loud. I'll say to people, if I'm in a meeting and I say something, I say, guys, I'm brainstorming here, right? Don't walk out of this room saying Lou wants to do. I form an opinion based on other people's perspectives. We had a leadership team meeting, and it was a great meeting because somebody says, look, here's what I want to do, in the clinical trial business. And he's got enough emotional intelligence that he says, look, guys, shoot my theory apart.
Yeah.
Tell me, because when we walk out of here, we want to make sure we do the right thing. If something happens in a leadership team meeting and somebody says something, it's totally unfair, i.e. Billy Bush, to run out and send that to the media.
Yeah.
That's absolutely.
It's funny, that Trump thing that you brought up about thinking out loud. I've been an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs tend, more than corporate people, tend to think out loud.
Absolutely.
Because they've run the company. Like, in the sense that there's not a board, there's not stockholders, and there's not as many rules. So entrepreneurs, the way Trump has lived, he's always, because
absolutely,
if you can think out, like when I thought out loud in my company, that doesn't mean we absolutely had to do it, whatever. But it's like that habit of thinking out loud probably has to be within the environment you work in. But I'm just saying why Trump thinks out loud.
But you want to foster the environment where people are free.
Willing,
I don't
yes.
care how bizarre the idea is. When I go into any negotiation, I have a perspective. People say position. I have a perspective. What's my goal? Not to win my perspective, but to come out with something better. What does that mean? It means socialization with socialize the idea at the table. As bizarre as it is, I remember many years ago sitting at a table, being a pilot. I remember saying to somebody one day, Chris, who's a great friend of mine, I work with him. Hey, Chris, what happens if we flew banners up and down the beach? They look at me like I'm crazy. Well, guess what? We flew a banner with "Sick of Your Job" called GSK.com. We hired 11 people for about $1,900.
Yeah.
Bizarre as it is. A billboard.
How many young professionals are laying out on the beach? A lot.
A lot. And by the way, how many people are sitting on the beach on July 4th weekend hating their job? And now, sick of your job, GSK. Listen.
That's pretty good.
But it's a bizarre idea.
Yeah, but I get there's risk to throwing that out there.
But guess what? But then you talk to the pilots, and you talk to this one, and you talk to Beth, who was our marketing advertising, and the idea that comes out of it is brilliant. Now, of course, we had to hide the newspapers from the CEO because if he knew, and then billboards on 95.
Yeah, that's
crazy but bizarre.
That's good stuff.
Yep.
So, the next section of the show, I want to get into the LA fires, and it's funny when the fires first came out. It's the mantra of the environmental movement, the left. They screamed, "This is all because of climate change." And
Global warming.
Global warming, climate change, global warming, and therefore, the bureaucrats of California, who everybody is in business with, they get off the hook. But that's going to be broken down soon. You can see that trying to blame it on climate change. It's not going to.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to fly in this one. And I always say that, leftism can literally kill you or at least burn your house down, because they're going to find out what these bureaucrats did. And here's an interesting: in 1938, there was the Big Basin Fire in L.A. Yeah, it burned 50,000 acres. So far today, I think in LA, it's burned about 40,000 acres. Now, obviously, there's a lot more homes.
The destruction is much greater.
Yeah, because there's a lot more homes. And even in hurricanes now, the water has nowhere to go. There's a lot more concrete, whatever. And we'll be the first two guys to say we're not climatologists. So, but I do want to, here's another thing I found interesting. The amount of CO2. Now, what we're going to get into, could have this been not, you can't prevent the fire, but how are you set up controlled to manage it? So the amount of CO2 from the fires that was released into the air is more than all the EVs cars
ever.
I don't know if it's EV everywhere, but every EV that's ever driven in California and all the government money that was funded for that EV and all the funding that they've done to try to stop CO2, it all just went up in the air with this fire. The amount is amazing. Just like volcanoes. If one or two volcanoes go within 3 or 5 years, that puts more CO2 than we've ever seen.
Than we can imagine. Exactly.
So, but it was interesting. Once it happened, I love going to the celebrities. So let's just go to Whoopi Goldberg first. We're going to do two celebrities, and I want you to hear what she says.
There was a fire catastrophe in California. Had to do with winds. You know how they're always saying, oh, the wind. It actually does. The winds move things and sparks move things. And it doesn't matter how much water you have if 900,000 buildings go up at the same time. Now, having lived in California, having lost every house.
All right, we get her point. Basically, water doesn't stop fires. It doesn't make a difference. So immediately, it's the defense of the California bureaucrats, the environmentalists. Nothing can prevent this. This is from the heavens. This is global warming. We caused it. We're bad. Now the next guy.
And by the way, she says 900,000 facility. Guess what? And people will remember 900,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and the wind moves things.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you can't forget that.
The wind moves things.
The wind does move things. But it's not how, she's not eloquent about what happened.
No.
It's all kind of don't try to find the truth about this. Just
she legitimizes what happened.
Yeah. It's it's very frustrating. But here's a guy that I think people will be surprised about. On what he has to say. And this is Bill Burr, the comedian from Boston.
Are you guys back in? And I think everybody did a great job.
Yeah.
Unlike the internet,
Yeah, right. I know. It's right.
Oh, my God. All of these fire experts. Why didn't you just fly a helicopter into the ocean? And then just, I don't know, because there was 100-knot winds? You want to do that? You want to do that at night, you lunatic?
How are you?
This was definitely mismanaged.
That's a big word we're hearing now.
Mismanaged, some idiot on the internet knows how to manage the worst fire in L.A. sitting there in his underwear. You know what? Looking at the footage on the internet, I have determined that this here was mismanaged.
Okay, so what you have there is the guy on the internet who is just horrified about what just happened in the modern era with all the fire equipment. The guy on the internet's the problem. He thinks they've managed it well. That is, this guy is supposed to be a hard-nosed, blue-collar Boston guy. The guy on the internet's the problem. And, now Jimmy Kimmel is, He's just a sack of.
You mean the guy that cried
Yeah,
after
yeah.
Trump won? That's the one.
He's like a sack of oatmeal.
Yeah.
A rotten sack of
Yeah,
oatmeal. So, like, if anyone, like, if they were on a show or the internet guy might have said to Bill Burr, well, first of all, the building and zoning practices in California, putting homes in prone areas, you should be doing something about that. Utility failures, and these utilities are almost pseudo-government agencies.
Well, how about the Paradise Fire of many years ago, right?
Yeah.
Utility.
Yeah.
Right?
There were still utility failures in this.
Correct.
Lack of coordination between agencies. People were saying we were running for our lives, and then 2 hours later, the authorities were telling them, now run for your life.
Now run for
They
your
had already run for their
Correct.
lives. That's how bad it was. The evacuation and communication failures, all this stuff, it needs to be practiced. So there are so many reasons why this happened. But Bill Burr thinks the problem is the guy on the internet. That is so frustrating hearing him say that.
Look, I go back to, my pilot training, so many years. What do you prepare for? You prepare not because you've had an out of fuel scenario or an accident. You prepare what if, okay?
Exactly.
And there's a checklist, and you fly with the FAA and you get recertified every 6 months or every year because and you're flying and he pulls the engine back. Why? Because you want to be prepared for what may never happen. In my opinion, look, people say, "Oh, what a great process we have." You show me who's leading the process,
Absolutely.
and I'll tell you if it's going to work.
So we're in Florida. We have hurricane problems.
Yes.
DeSantis, he's not preparing when the hurricane arrives. Florida under DeSantis is always preparing for hurricanes. And I'll tell you.
Before it arrives.
Of course. Months before, years before. They have a system in place. They take actions to make sure when it does show up, they're ready for it. I would bet if you take Newsom and DeSantis, if DeSantis had gotten to California, just give him a year before that came. I'm not saying there wouldn't have been a big fire.
There would have been.
But there would have been a better
Contained
result.
and a result.
A better result than what this guy does. That frustrates me that people, their homes just got burned
And
down.
you hear, and here's my perspective, 3,400, the justification of what they did. I mean, let's be honest. The way these people get along impacts the outcome, right? Process determines product. And what do you see? He's complaining about Trump doing this or what happens. Look, I want to go back a little bit to, behaviors. People who are entrepreneurs or leaders push people out of their comfort zones. That's not a bad thing to do. But if you're wrong, you don't justify what you've done, right? I can have HR scenarios where somebody says, well, he did this. What about you? What could you have done differently? And here are people, whether it's the mayor or the fire chief or the governor, telling us how we are wrong for making this observation, how, oh, by the way, I was right.
Yeah.
What about... listen, as a pilot, what can I do before I get in the airplane to make sure my plane is safe or the flight is safe? I wasn't there, but the outcome is pretty pathetic.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic. And the climate change thing and global warming is not going to fly for him. It's funny, throughout the show, that is one of the things that Bill Burr's comment totally fires me up. And he nearly lost his house.
Yes.
But it's
the internet. That's
the problem.
Really?
The
No,
internet.
It's not the problem. It's the lack of leadership. It's the lack of proactive management. It's the lack of a homogenous team that thinks months. I mean, listen, not the first fire they had in California, Tom.
No,
right?
They've been fighting these
So,
for a century.
As Chaucer says, past is prologue, right? You had a bunch of fires. Chances are you're going to have another one.
Yeah.
And, don't tell me that the reservoir is empty for some reason. I mean, not your first fire, right? Not your first rodeo, right?
Yeah.
That's the part that amazes me.
I'm hoping that, well, who knows? We're going to have to wait and see. But what we're going to move on to, and this is...
and by the way, I might add,
yeah,
I'm not picking on the voters, but guess what? The leadership is there because somebody put them there.
Yeah, and I haven't dug into this, but the way there are a lot of people of the right there, and I would say thinking Democrats in California who have become very fed up. But I don't understand the machine, the political machine out there. But they say that political machine is so strong and so rigged that it's hard to fight it. I don't know what that is because I haven't looked into it.
But people have short memories.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, is this serious enough to do X, Y, or Z? And you know it and I know it. Unfortunately, people vote by the party.
Yeah.
You know, and that's listen,
killing
the
them.
sad part is whether it's North Carolina or whether it's California, there could have been a lot different things put in place.
Oh, absolutely. So this Greenland thing. And this is Trump saying he wants to acquire Greenland.
Denmark. Oh yeah, Greenland. Yep. Owned by Denmark.
Owned by Denmark. But now over the years they've been giving him more autonomy, and there is down the road there's a plan for Greenland to be on its own.
Yes.
But what I'm like, and I always say these seems to be the more kind of the elite people in society who are like, oh my God, that is so ridiculous. But the history of us acquiring land is part of the American history and the history of a lot of countries. And so we had the Alaska purchase for $7.2 million. We had the Louisiana purchase, which almost doubled the country by Thomas Jefferson. The Gadsden purchase from Mexico, which is, part of Arizona and New Mexico. These were all expansions of America's footprint. Truman and Kennedy also wanted to buy Greenland. Truman offered them $100 million in gold. And it was...
I remember that. Reading about it.
And it was always done in private,
right?
This negotiation. And what I've read... The negotiations were very hard. It was during the Cold War. And the way I kind of took from some of the stuff I read, Truman was like this to Greenland. During World War II, we just built bases there. We weren't asking. Denmark was taking over the Nazis.
And we did it.
Yeah, we did it. So with Truman, supposedly it was take the $100 million in gold now. Or if this Russian thing goes bad,
you ain't getting the gold.
We're doing it for free.
We're going to do it for free. Yeah, exactly.
We're going to do it for free. So what's going on there, and Americans have to understand we have to protect our interests. I know it sounds crazy when Trump says it because we're just not used to hearing it.
But remember, he's thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not done in private.
Right.
But what's he thinking of? He's thinking of the country, the safety, right? The protection of North America. Yeah. And as bizarre as some of my ideas were, but let the guy,
So you know what's going on up there. The Chinese and the Russians are moving into the Arctic.
Exactly.
So that's why.
But nobody knows that, Tom.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah. So this is a reaction.
Yes.
To our security.
Yes.
And this is why you have bad fires in California because there's no preventive stuff. So that's how it. And you know what? I'm shocked because the Dems love fighting Russia, right? They love fighting Russia and Ukraine. So why don't we fight them from Greenland? If you hate Russia, we should take Greenland.
Exactly.
And I actually heard if they talk to the Inuit people, that is the 90% of the population there, and the old word is Eskimo, but people use the word Inuit.
Inuit, right.
So that I heard in some polls, but they say they might not be accurate. We got to let it play out. But over 50% were at least interested in hearing Donald's offer. So President Trump might make them an offer they can't refuse, and it could work out for Denmark.
Well, and listen to the offer or listen to the reason. I mean, anytime we acquired land, it really wasn't bad, right? I mean, the Louisiana purchase is the one that I remember reading about.
Yeah.
And then there was Alaska. I mean, here we are in America. A lot of people don't like us, but protect our country. And nobody knows the story about who's moving into the area.
Yeah.
And so, Donald, he is an entrepreneur, and a lot of people don't like it because he moves them or us out of our comfort zones.
You got it. And you have to continue to evolve.
Right.
And you know what? I kind of sometimes feel like the political elites, the media elites, they're like, I can't believe he said that. It's kind of like I got mine, and we don't need to upset anyone.
Right.
It's like a weird
Right.
psychology.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. But we're gonna have to see, what comes of. Even Denmark might want to do that deal. So I thought, I think this Greenland thing, and first of all, it has a ton of rare earth minerals.
Absolutely.
It has a ton of energy
Yep.
that they're not capable of taking out. It costs Denmark $600 million a year to give to
Yeah,
them.
it's a
I don't
lot
think
of
there's
money.
much of return
No.
for the Danish. So everybody, let Trump and his team and our government see if there is a deal there. It could be good for your kids' security.
Well, Tom, it's no different than when a company says they want to acquire another company. The first reaction is, "Oh, woe is us. They're going to do that." And there have been many acquisitions in our history where that acquisition was not bad.
Yeah.
At first, everybody says no, right? They're all negative wizards.
Yeah.
But let's listen to it. And again, my concern is security of America.
Yeah.
Number one.
And China is coming
And there
for
are
us.
people that are coming after us.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So stop thinking of like let it play out. And there is a weird thing that we should kind of just be happy with what we have, but that's going to lead to problems. You got to be growing and thinking and thriving. And
Listen, the election, I see people on Facebook. I'm not watching the election or the inauguration. I'm going to watch the cartoons. Well, if you listen to the inauguration, you might have a different perspective.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to vote for the man, but in my book, there's another perspective.
Absolutely.
Socialize an idea. How do I learn? Not verifying all of my, what's the word?
bias.
Bias. It's, what do you think?
Yeah,
And by the way, there's a slim chance that I might move my perspective.
absolutely. Well, you know what? We're going to wrap on that. This was a great show. I loved having you, Lou, and I think we covered a lot.
We did.
We covered a lot. So, Old Gravy Podcast, great having you today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Disclaimer. The host assumes no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.